Hello, my name is Faith, and I never thought it would come to this. I opened my bakery, poured everything I had into it, and invited my family to share that moment with me. They didn't show up. Instead, they went to my cousin's party across the street. It wasn't just a missed opportunity, it was a statement, a message that said I wasn't worth their time. But the worst part? It wasn't just that day. It was the years of quiet sabotage, the endless betrayals disguised as love, all leading up to that moment. They thought they could push me down, keep me small. What they didn't know was that I had been quietly building something bigger than all of them. And when the time came, I made them pay for what they'd done. But the real question is, will they ever realize the damage they caused before it's too late? I flipped the sign on the glass door at 7:15 a.m., sunlight filtering through the elm branches that lined Merriweather Street. The letters read, "Grand Opening," freshly painted in pastel blue. My breath caught, not from nerves but from something heavier, hope, expectation, longing. Inside, the scent of freshly baked sourdough mingled with the faint hum of a vintage radio playing soft jazz. Flour dust motes danced in rays of morning light. I pulled a tray of warm baguettes from the oven and placed them by the window. Then I arranged cupcakes with miniature rose petals on a cake stand. I stepped back, as if stepping onto a stage, and smoothed my apron. I reminded myself, you built this. 2 years of savings, long nights, borrowed equipment, test batches, all to prove that people could see me, not just as the little sister who bakes. By 9 o'clock, a handful of customers trickled in, tourists, a middle-aged couple on a stroll. They murmured compliments, bought a loaf or two. I smiled and thanked them, but my eyes kept drifting to the reserved family-only table I had insisted on placing near the front. By noon, the reserved seats remained empty. The cupcakes were untouched, the baguettes still crisp and full. I folded the reserved sign, placed it in the drawer, and cleaned the surface. My phone remained silent. No calls, no texts. In that pause, I felt how deeply invisible I had become. Then I saw them. Across the street, through the large windows, balloons and streamers beyond the neighboring house, laughter carrying over the autumn air. My family, my mother, father, Orion, cheering, hugging. Orion stood by the buffet, cutting cake. I swallowed. My throat tightened. I stepped back, feigning attention to a customer's request, but my heart pounded. The irony struck me. Both houses face each other, separated by a narrow road and a line of sugar maples. Yet they exist in different realities. My bakery, empty seats, quiet determination. Their party, vibrant, full of voices, of the kind that included my name. I wiped a counter and thought of past birthdays, potlucks, holidays. I was always the one bringing the dessert, the extra plate, the quiet support, but never in the spotlight, never invited to speak, never asked for applause. I forced myself to step forward, greet a customer who had just walked in. I poured coffee, described the flavors, led them to a corner table. My hands moved fast so I wouldn't think too much, because if I thought, I would crack. When the afternoon drifted toward evening, I closed shop early, partly defeat, partly resolve. I folded menus, wiped fallen crumbs, and turned off the ovens. The handwritten place cards I crafted lay in their neat stack. I tucked each one into a drawer, breathing in the final hush of my bakery. I stood in the doorway, watching the house across the street flicker with lights. I pulled out my phone. No messages, no apologies, but I typed and deleted, typed again. Finally, I posted one photo, the bakery sign glowing at dusk, and captioned, "Open today, thanks to everyone who showed up." I didn't tag them, but I made sure they would see it. I didn't even hear the ding when the text came in. The bakery was quiet by then. I had closed early, gone upstairs, taken off my shoes, and stood barefoot on the wooden floor of my apartment above the shop. The scent of yeast and cinnamon still clung to my hair and sweater. I was halfway through wiping down the little dining table when my phone vibrated. That familiar buzz, the kind that makes you think, maybe this is the message that makes it better. But it never is. I picked up the phone. The screen lit up with my mother's name. The message was short. You should have picked a better day. Everyone was already committed. Just one sentence. No punctuation, no apology, not even a, sorry we missed it. I stared at it, waiting for my brain to fill in a better version, something warmer, more human. But that was it. A passive scolding wrapped in deflection. I set the phone down, slowly, deliberately, then walked to the kitchen, rolled up my sleeves, and turned on the oven. When I can't cry, I bake. I pulled out the large ceramic bowl from under the counter and started on a new batch of dough. My fingers moved instinctively. Flour, salt, water, starter. The rhythm of kneading, folding, turning. It gave me something to control when everything else felt rigged against me. Each push into the dough softened my frustration, even as the silence in the room grew louder. The text kept replaying in my mind. You should have picked a better day, as if their absence was my mistake, as if they hadn't known for 3 months, as if I hadn't hand-delivered invitations. It wasn't just this day, it was every time before. I remembered my 29th birthday, how I had invited the family to dinner at my old apartment in Atlanta. I'd decorated the space, cooked for hours, cleaned every corner, and then, right as I was setting the table, my mom called to cancel. Orion had just gotten into that startup accelerator, and they were throwing him a surprise party. We didn't want to hurt your feelings, sweetie, she said, but this is a big deal for Orion. I had nodded into the phone. I even smiled when she asked for my mac and cheese recipe to bring to his party. And I gave it to her. That night, I sat alone with a birthday cake I made myself, listening to the apartment above me blast music. My upstairs neighbor was celebrating something too. I remember thinking, at least someone's being celebrated today. Back then, I still made excuses for them. I told myself I wasn't flashy enough, not loud enough, not big deal enough, but over time the pattern wore down the edges of my tolerance. And nothing was more telling than Atlanta, 6 years ago. I was 28, still working 60-hour weeks in corporate catering. Orion had come to visit, pitching this wild idea for a food truck that combined global soul food with local, seasonal ingredients. He had the charisma. I had the spreadsheets, the branding, the flavor profiles. I built the pitch deck, designed the logo, even skipped 2 paid weekends to help him prep dishes in my tiny kitchen. We laughed like siblings. I thought, maybe for once, I'd be seen. He promised to list me as co-founder, said we'd build this together. The night of the food truck festival, he stood on a makeshift stage in Piedmont Park. Lights overhead, dozens of people clapping. He gave a speech, thanked his amazing team, his investors, his girlfriend at the time. He didn't mention me. Our eyes met as he stepped off the stage. He smirked. Not an apologetic smirk, a knowing one. Like we had some private understanding that I didn't need credit, just presence. But presence without acknowledgement is still absence. Back in my kitchen tonight, I pulled the dough into shape and set it into the proofing basket. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked over to the window. Outside, Merriweather Street had gone still. The remnants of Orion's party across the street were gone. The chairs stacked, lights out, celebration over, but mine had never even begun. I opened my journal, the one I keep hidden behind the coffee canister, and I wrote, I am no longer the second choice. Then underneath it, tomorrow, I rename the morning pastry, Faith's Rise. I shut the notebook, pulled my laptop out, and opened a tab. I searched for custom signage. Simple. Clean. No gimmicks. In the order form, I typed, family discount discontinued. Pressed confirm. Didn't blink. I was exhausted. The smell of fresh-baked bread had filled the bakery and my apartment for hours. It had seeped into the walls, into the corners of my mind, but no one had shown up for me. Not the family, not the people I had thought would be there. It was the kind of hollow silence that settles deep in your bones, reminding you that no matter how many loaves you bake, they'll never taste as sweet as the love you wish you could give. The next morning, the sun rose and lit up the bakery, casting a warm glow through the front windows. I thought I'd wake up feeling refreshed. Maybe the day would be different. Maybe the bitterness would wear off. But as I reached for the kettle, I saw it. Something sitting right outside my bakery door. I walked over slowly, unsure of what I was seeing. There was a box, plain and nondescript. No address, no label, just a simple cardboard box resting against the doorframe. My pulse quickened. I bent down, my hand trembling as I lifted it. The box was surprisingly heavy. I glanced down the street to see if anyone was watching. No one. It was still early, the streets empty. I brought the box inside, setting it gently on the counter. When I opened it, I was hit with the scent of lemon. My own lemon loaf. The one I had baked with extra care, the one I had personally delivered to my Aunt Becky just 2 days ago. The one I had hoped would be received with joy, or at least acknowledgement. But there it was, wrapped in cellophane, sitting in that box, cold and untouched. Not even a note, not even a card, just the loaf. I stared at it for a long moment, then set it on the counter. It felt like the world's most obvious rejection. My own family, my own aunt, sending my effort back. I forced myself to slice through it, to see if anyone had even taken a bite. It was the same as when I had baked it. No one had touched it, not even worth a bite. My mind was buzzing, but I kept my hands steady as I wrapped the loaf back up, as if I were carefully wrapping up my hurt. I walked toward the trash can, but just before I tossed it in, I hesitated. I stood there for a moment longer, the box heavy in my hands, a quiet respect for the effort it had taken, for the feeling it had carried, even though it was all for nothing. I dropped the loaf into the trash but wrapped it carefully enough to keep the sting from overwhelming me. When the door chimed, signaling the arrival of a customer, I didn't flinch. It wasn't unusual for the first customer of the day to be a tourist or a local needing a quick cup of coffee. They didn't know my story. I didn't need them to. As I served them, my phone buzzed. I looked down. A direct message. I frowned when I saw the name. Chef Lorna. A mentor from my time in Atlanta. I hadn't spoken to her in a while, but she had been one of the few people who had taught me the ins and outs of pastry when I first started. She was tough but real, never sugarcoating anything. Her message popped up. Just saw your bakery online. Proud of you. But watch your back. I heard your cousin is playing dirty with vendors. My heart sank. I stared at the screen for a moment, blinking as I processed her words. My cousin, Orion, the one who always smiled and called me family. The one who had thrown a party across the street, ignoring my grand opening. Lorna wasn't done. She went on to name a few suppliers she'd recommended to me, people I trusted, who had pulled out, just like that. No explanation. I felt the walls closing in, the text from my mom, the silent treatment from everyone, the loaf returned without a single word. Now this. I wasn't sure what Orion had done, but I knew him well enough to guess. He was behind it, using his connections, using his charm, using everything to make sure I stayed small, stayed in the shadows. I set my phone down and checked my invoices. Sure enough, 2 of my regular suppliers had been delayed in their shipments. The way it was worded, too clean, too perfect. I didn't need to be told again. Orion had set this up. I didn't cry. Crying wouldn't change anything. But as I stared at the invoices, something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to be their second choice anymore. I took out my journal and wrote, I am no longer the second choice. Then, under it, I wrote, contingency suppliers. I let out a long breath. The next move was mine. No more being a backup. I wasn't going to just sit here and let him take what was mine. I looked over at the ingredients on the counter, some of them local, others from suppliers who didn't even care enough to show up. The dough had risen while I sat there, staring at the screen. It was time to bake again. Only this time, I would use ingredients I had sourced myself from small local farms I had just discovered. As I mixed the batter, the hum of the mixer almost drowned out the noise in my head, but not completely. It was still there, that voice telling me not to stop, not to be weak, to keep pushing. And for the first time in a while, I listened. I kneaded the dough with a little more force, pushing the anger into the bread, the frustration into every twist. And when I placed the loaf in the oven, I didn't smile, but I felt a small flicker of something else, a quiet kind of defiance. They had underestimated me, all of them. I glanced at the window. Across the street, the lights from Orion's house were still on, probably still celebrating. But I didn't care anymore. I wasn't going to be the one left standing in the dark. I wiped my hands on my apron, picked up my phone again, and placed an order. A custom sign, simple and direct. Family discount discontinued. I hit confirm, and just like that, the first step had been taken. The morning after the bakery's grand opening was a strange kind of calm. The quiet felt heavy, like it had been waiting for something, waiting for the fallout from the day before. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew I wasn't ready for it. As I entered the bakery, the scent of freshly baked pastries filled the air. The dough had risen perfectly, and the warmth of the ovens seemed to wrap around me like an old, familiar embrace. But that wasn't enough to mask the gnawing sensation in my stomach. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down, and just waiting for the inevitable push. My phone buzzed on the counter, pulling me from my thoughts. I picked it up absently, scrolling through messages. Most were from customers wishing me well, which I appreciated more than I could express. But then, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The reservation list for the day was up, and 3 names stood out to me. They weren't regulars, they weren't strangers either. I froze for a second, my thumb hovering over the screen as I realized who they were: Carol and Mark, old friends of my parents. And right beneath them, Orion's name, well, not Orion himself, but his cronies. People who always seemed to have a finger in every pie, whether they belonged there or not. I didn't need to see the names again. I knew exactly who they were. The ones who always asked questions when I was younger. The ones who would drop by for family gatherings, then leave with a few pieces of advice and a long-winded story about how much they were helping the family business. But these people didn't just drop by. They watched, they judged, they were spies in my own world. I closed the app and let the phone fall to the counter with a soft click. There it was again, the weight of their presence. This wasn't just a visit, this was surveillance. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't help it. I was on edge. It wasn't just my family that had ignored my opening, but these family friends, too. They were sent here to poke around, to take stock of what I'd done and report back to their king, Orion. As the morning wore on, they arrived. The group walked in, just as I expected. Mark, Carol, and another face I didn't recognize immediately, but knew well enough. They all acted like they didn't know me. Or maybe they were pretending. After all, how could I forget the time Mark had talked over my parents and told them I wasn't serious about baking? Or when Carol, so full of advice, had tried to push me into real estate instead of pursuing a career that made me happy? But I didn't want to fight, not yet. I kept my smile in place, like a mask I was too tired to take off. They asked questions. Too many questions. How's the business doing, Faith? How long did it take you to get everything up and running? What suppliers are you using for these pastries? You know, I hear there's a new local vendor that might help with the ingredients. Carol was practically taking notes on her phone while she looked at the menu, her eyes flicking from item to item like she was weighing whether she could replicate it at home or take the idea for her own project. Mark asked about my plans for expansion, the kind of questions I'd been expecting ever since Orion's family had shown up across the street. The kind of questions that always came with the same subtext: how soon until you'll fail? And of course, one of them pulled out their phone to snap a photo of the decor, as if they were taking inventory, not admiring what I had built. They didn't realize I was watching them, not with eyes of anger, but of understanding. They were doing their job, just like I'd done mine in the past. Pretend like everything was fine and look for the weak spot to exploit. My mind raced, but I didn't let them see. Instead, I kept my smile and kept my answers measured, polite. I played the game, but I knew the truth. When they left, I felt it. I felt the weight of their visit, not the curiosity, but the quiet, calculating energy they'd left behind. I could tell they were trying to figure me out, see if I was a threat or an opportunity. I needed to get away. I needed air. I grabbed my coat and stepped out, making my way to the local cafe across the street. I didn't have a reason to go, except that I needed someone to talk to, someone who had no skin in the game, someone who had always had my back. Lyra was there, just like I knew she would be. We'd worked together in Atlanta for years, and she had seen me at my best and worst. She wasn't family. She wasn't a family friend. She was just Lyra. And that was all I needed right now. Faith, she said, a warm smile spreading across her face as I walked in. She waved me over to her corner booth. How's the bakery? It's great, I said, forcing a smile. But she could see right through me, and she didn't press. After a moment of silence, she leaned in. What's really going on? I sighed, feeling the weight of the last few days settle in my chest. I think they're trying to sabotage me, Lara. I just had a visit from a few people who aren't even on my reservation list, asking about my suppliers, taking pictures. I can't figure it out, but it feels like they're trying to get something, either to copy me or discredit me. Her expression shifted, becoming more serious. They're phishing, she said. Someone's prepping to copy or discredit you. And you know what? I think I know who's behind it. I looked at her, my stomach turning. Who? Orion, she said quietly. I heard some rumors. His family's planning a luxury baking pop-up. It's a direct copy of what you're doing, Faith. My heart sank, but I didn't say anything. I knew this day would come. I had known it from the moment I opened this bakery. I had thought I was ready, but hearing Lyra's confirmation made everything feel real. Just be careful, she added. Watch your back. I nodded, my mind already racing with possibilities. What could I do to stop him? When I returned to the bakery, I didn't waste any time. I sat down at my computer and started drafting my weekly bakery newsletter. But this time, the words weren't just for my loyal customers. This time, the words had a message. I wrote, "This kitchen was built from scratch, no handouts, no clones." I didn't need to say any more. Those who needed to hear it would get the message loud and clear. I hit send, and the newsletter went out to 2,000 subscribers. Almost immediately, the replies started coming in. The words of encouragement and support from customers who truly appreciated what I was doing warmed me, but it was one reply that stood out. They're scared of what you've become. I leaned back in my chair, my fingers still on the keyboard, and took a deep breath. Maybe it was time for them to be scared. As night settled in, I stood by the bakery window, watching Orion's house across the street. The lights were still on, people still celebrating, but I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt calm. I wasn't done, not by a long shot. You started this, I whispered to myself. Don't be shocked when I finish it. I hadn't even unlocked the front door to the bakery yet when I noticed something was off. The air in the bakery felt thick, suffocating even. I could feel it pressing against my chest. My hands shook slightly as I turned the key in the lock. As the door creaked open, something caught my eye. The back door. It was ajar. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. I hadn't left it open. In fact, I made sure everything was locked tight before heading to bed last night. But there it was. The back door, slightly open, like someone had just left. No signs of forced entry, no broken glass, no signs of a struggle. It was just open. I swallowed hard, stepping cautiously inside. My boots clicked on the wood floor as I made my way toward the counter. My gaze darted around the shop, looking for anything that seemed out of place. The baker's tools were in their usual spots, the display case full of fresh pastries. Everything was as it should be, except for the door. And then, I saw it, a black and gold business card. It was resting casually on the counter, as if placed there with intent. There was no name, no contact information, just a single line. Great brands don't wait. I picked up the card slowly, my fingers brushing against the slick surface. It felt like a weight had settled in my stomach. I had been warned about this. I knew it, even before it happened. But still, the reality of it hit me like a punch in the gut. I was being watched. I glanced at the door again, my pulse quickening, my eyes narrowed. I couldn't help but wonder if someone had been here while I was asleep. Were they in the back when I came in this morning? Or had they simply left their mark, a sign of intimidation? I took a deep breath, fighting the panic rising in my chest. I needed to think. I needed to make sure nothing had been taken. I turned and walked toward the back office, the camera monitor blinking softly. There was a gap in the footage, just a few minutes unaccounted for. I stared at the screen. Someone had been here, but they were good at what they did. Whoever it was had covered their tracks. I dialed the police, my voice calm but firm as I explained the situation. They asked questions, trying to get a sense of whether something had been stolen. I explained I hadn't noticed anything missing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The officer on the line paused, his tone shifting slightly. Sounds like intimidation, not theft. Someone's sending you a message. They're trying to get inside your head. I let the words sink in. It wasn't about stealing anything. It was about control. It was about me knowing that they could enter whenever they pleased. Maybe they want you scared, not robbed, my bakery assistant chimed in when I relayed the officer's theory. She was the one who checked the cameras with me, always so calm in these situations, always practical. I stared at the screen, the footage flickering, the gap still there. They won't win, I said under my breath. I felt something cold creeping in, the realization that I wasn't just fighting to make my business work. I was fighting to protect everything I had worked for, everything I'd built. I'd been here before. I'd seen this before. But back then, it was different. Back then, I didn't have to stand on my own. Back then, someone had always had my back. Now, I was learning the hard way that trust wasn't something I could afford to give out freely. The officer's voice came back through the phone, breaking my thoughts. Do you want us to come by, make a report? I hesitated. No, I think I've got it handled for now. But I'll keep an eye out. I hung up the phone and took a moment to breathe. This wasn't a simple break-in. This wasn't just a case of someone trying to steal a recipe or two. This was personal. I let my mind drift back to the past. A part of me couldn't help but remember the words Orion had said years ago. People only respect what they can't access. I'd never fully understood what he meant then. Now, it made sense. Orion wasn't just watching. He was testing me, pushing my limits, seeing how far he could go before I cracked. I shook my head, letting the thoughts dissolve for a moment. I couldn't let myself spiral. Not now. The bakery had to keep running. I grabbed a mixing bowl from the shelf and started preparing the next batch of dough. My hands moved mechanically, kneading the dough with a focus that almost felt meditative. But as I worked, my mind kept circling back to that card, to the words on it. Great brands don't wait. I could almost hear Orion's voice in my head. I could almost hear him saying it to me, as if the words weren't just a warning, but a challenge. And I couldn't ignore it anymore. I grabbed my phone and opened the voice memo app, recording a message. My voice was steady, but underneath, there was a quiet fire that I wasn't willing to hide any longer. If you ever step into my space again, I said, each word calculated and measured, you'll find the cameras won't be the only thing watching. I let the words sit in the air for a moment before hitting send. I stared at the screen. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. A confrontation? A response? I didn't know, but I did know one thing. I had just crossed a line. Minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was Orion. No, not directly. It was a no-caller ID. 3 missed calls. I ignored them. The voicemail that followed was all too familiar. You've changed, Orion's voice crackled through. Just remember who taught you how to bake. The coldness in his voice was almost too much to bear, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I turned my attention to my website. I typed out the words as if they were a declaration. This bakery stands on original recipes. No copies. No echoes. Just soul. I hit send, my fingers lingering for just a moment over the keyboard. This was my line in the sand. But before I could pull away, the notifications began to flood in. Messages from customers, friends, even family. Words of support, of love, of encouragement. One in particular stood out, a message from a longtime customer who had always stood by me. They're scared of what you've become. I smiled faintly at the screen. The validation I hadn't asked for, but the kind I'd needed nonetheless. As night fell, I stood at the window of my apartment, watching the lights flicker from across the street. The shadows of Orion's family cast long on the pavement as the party continued, just as loud and unbothered as ever. But I wasn't unbothered anymore. You started this, I whispered to myself, the words barely escaping my lips. Don't be shocked when I finish it. The morning after the 1-star review hit, I woke up to an inbox full of new messages. But it wasn't birthday wishes or the usual client inquiries. No, these were reviews, 11 of them, to be exact, and they were all a slap in the face. I opened my phone with a sense of dread, expecting the worst, and sure enough, there they were. 1-star reviews, one after the other, each comment more bizarrely specific than the last. Entitled, "Cold," one review said. "Doesn't even acknowledge the staff's hard work," said another. The worst part? These details were so personal. They weren't about the bakery's quality, the ambiance, or the food. They were about me, and things only people close to me, my family, would know. I stared at my phone for a long while, my breath shallow. My hands clenched around it, not in anger, but in disbelief. This wasn't just a review bomb. This was a direct attack, a smear campaign meant to take me down. I could feel my chest tighten, the familiar sting of betrayal pushing through my chest. The worst part was the fact that these reviews weren't just targeting the business, they were attacking me, my character, my identity. I placed my phone down slowly, trying to steady myself. I needed to think. The last thing I wanted to do was act out of anger. This was too important. I stepped out from behind the counter, the sounds of the kitchen still buzzing with activity as the bakery assistant prepared for the day. 11 new reviews, all 1-star, I said, my voice as steady as I could manage. Sounds like review bombing, she replied, crossing her arms. They're not just attacking you, they're trying to erase what you've built. I nodded. That's exactly what it feels like. The assistant, who had been with me since the grand opening, walked over to the register, pulling up the online reviews. We'll need to document everything, screenshots. We can't let them get away with this. I felt a flicker of appreciation for her steady presence. You're right. We'll make sure it's all saved. It was going to take more than screenshots and documentation to get through this. I needed to think bigger. They wanted to destroy my reputation, erase everything I had worked for, but I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I walked back to my office and grabbed my laptop, pulling up the local journalist Ava Sinclair's contact information. Ava had been there for my grand opening, and her piece had brought in a lot of positive attention. If anyone could help me fight this, it was her. I typed out a quick email, my fingers moving quickly as I outlined everything that had been happening. The fake reviews, the smear campaign. I needed her to understand this wasn't just about a few bad Yelp reviews. This was personal. It was calculated. Ava, I wrote, I need your help. Things have escalated with Orion's side of the family. I'm being targeted, and it's starting to affect the business. Please reach out when you can. I've got some details to share. I hit send, then sat back in my chair, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. I had no idea how this would play out, but I wasn't going to let them win. Not now. Not ever. By the time the evening rolled around, Ava had gotten back to me. She was willing to meet. I walked over to the small cafe a few blocks from the bakery where we had arranged to talk. The evening air was chilly, and I wrapped my jacket tighter around myself as I approached the cafe. Ava was already seated in the corner, her laptop open in front of her. She had a keen eye, sharp and focused. As a journalist, she knew how to spot a story that needed to be told. Faith, she greeted me with a smile, standing up to shake my hand. What's going on? You said things had escalated, but I didn't expect this. I handed her a folder. Screenshots, voicemail transcriptions, and even some old texts from Orion. I need you to see this from my perspective. This is more than just a few bad reviews. This is sabotage. She flipped through the pages, her expression hardening. This is bigger than I thought. You're right. This isn't just a business issue. This is family warfare. I nodded, my throat tight. It's personal. He's trying to ruin everything I've built. And now he's using people, friends of the family, to smear me. Ava paused, tapping her pen against her notebook. I've got a few connections. I'll write something up. I'm going to expose this, but I need to do it carefully. We don't want to give them any more ammunition. I breathed a sigh of relief. Ava was on my side. I hadn't felt like I had a solid ally in all of this until now, but Ava's determination mirrored my own. I could see the wheels turning in her head, already planning the story. I'll make sure it's respectful, she said. but it's going to hit hard. People need to know what's really going on. I stayed quiet as she worked, allowing her to take the lead. She had the experience, the skills, and the network. I just needed her to tell the truth. That night, Ava's article went live. Behind the apron, a chef's stand against family sabotage. It wasn't an expose, but it was everything I needed. Ava had done her homework, and the story hit hard. It wasn't just about my bakery. It was about the emotional toll, the quiet sabotage, and the personal attacks that had been made against me. She included everything: the timeline of events, anonymous quotes from my bakery staff, even blurry images of the reviews. It wasn't a slam piece, but it didn't need to be. It was the truth, and that was all that mattered. The next morning, the bakery's Yelp page was flooded with comments, positive comments, supportive comments. Customers, some of them longtime supporters, were speaking out against the smear campaign. A few even mentioned Ava's article. "This woman is a legend," one review read. "Boundaries taste better than betrayal." As the comments rolled in, I noticed something. My Yelp rating was climbing back up. People had seen through the lies. I didn't say anything. I didn't post on social media. I didn't respond to Orion's texts, though they kept coming. I was done explaining myself. Instead, I walked into the bakery and updated the chalkboard above the register with a simple message: "You can't dim a light built in the dark." It wasn't just for the customers who came in today. It was for me. It was for the family I had built, for the people who supported me. It was for the future. I didn't need to fight anymore. The world was already seeing the truth. The following morning, I woke up to a familiar knot in my stomach. I hadn't checked the reviews yet, but I knew they were still there, lingering, waiting. Before I could even start the day, I decided to head to the bakery early. A part of me just wanted to get the work done, to distract myself from everything else that was happening around me. I grabbed a coffee from the counter and set it down beside me while I started to work through the tasks for the day. Just as I was about to settle in, I heard the door chime. I looked up and saw her, Natalie. She stood there, hesitating just inside the door, her face pale but determined. She was alone, no Orion in sight, which was unusual. She wasn't the type to show up without him unless something was terribly wrong. "Can I have just a minute?" she asked, her voice thick with hesitation. She was clutching her phone tightly, almost as though it were a lifeline. I took a deep breath, trying to mask the surprise and the tension building in my chest. "Sure, come in." She stepped inside and closed the door quietly behind her, moving toward the corner booth where I usually sat to unwind. We both sat down, the silence between us thickening as she stared at her phone, as if gathering the courage to speak. I don't know how else to say this," Natalie started, her hands trembling slightly as she placed her phone on the table between us. "But you deserve to know the truth. All of it." I raised an eyebrow, my pulse quickening. There was something in her tone, something unspoken. I wasn't sure what it was, but I knew she wasn't here just to apologize or offer empty support. "What truth?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, though my mind raced. Natalie took a deep breath, her face crumpling slightly. I wasn't supposed to tell you this, but I can't keep quiet anymore. I can't be a part of it." She paused, fumbling with her phone before finally showing me something. It was a screenshot, an image of a private group chat titled Project Reset. My stomach dropped as I glanced at the names attached to the conversation: Orion, their aunt, and, shockingly, my own mother. "They've been planning this," Natalie whispered, her voice barely audible. "They want you to fail, to walk away from your bakery. They're going to discredit you, make you look bad, and then they want you to sell." I froze. My throat tightened, and for a moment it felt like the air around me had thickened. This wasn't just a random smear campaign. This was a coordinated effort, one that went deeper than I had ever imagined. "Project Reset?" I repeated, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "They want me gone?" Natalie nodded, her eyes filled with remorse. "They've been talking about you, how you're too full of yourself, how your business isn't going to last. They want to make sure you burn out." She scrolled through the messages, showing me more. "Let her burn out. She's too full of herself. Stop the supplier discount. One message stood out in particular, and I could hear Orion's voice in my head as I read the words. She'll crawl back when no one shows up anymore. My fingers tightened around the edge of the table. My mind raced. All the signs, all the little things I'd seen, were suddenly making sense. They'd been playing me like a pawn, using their influence to sabotage me from the shadows. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. Natalie hesitated, her eyes shifting away from mine for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was laced with shame. "Because I didn't know how far they were going to take it. I didn't know they'd go this low. I can't marry into this family. I couldn't sleep knowing what they were doing to you. What they planned for your business." I looked at her, trying to read her face, trying to see if she was telling the truth. I could feel a strange mix of anger and understanding bubbling up inside me. "You didn't have to do this," I said softly. "You could have stayed out of it." "I know," she whispered, "but I can't. You didn't deserve any of this." I didn't say anything right away. Instead, I just looked at the messages on her phone, my mind processing the weight of what had just been handed to me. I wasn't sure what to do next, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't going to play defense. "You gave me everything I needed," I said finally, my voice calm, almost serene. "Thank you." I reached over, grabbed her phone, and carefully placed it into the folder I kept locked in my office. There would be time to process it all, but for now, it was safe. Natalie was watching me, clearly expecting more, but I didn't have much to say. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to yell. I was done being reactive. "What are you going to do with all this?" she asked, her voice small but determined. I leaned back in the booth, thinking for a moment. I could already feel the old anger starting to rise, but I held it in check. "I'm not out for revenge. I'm done playing defense. This ends now." Natalie seemed to consider my words for a moment before nodding slowly, as if understanding that I had finally reached the point where nothing, not even family, could stop me. As she left, she turned back one last time, her eyes searching mine. "I don't know if I'll be able to make it right with them," she said softly, almost as if speaking to herself. "But I hope this helps." "I'll handle it," I said quietly. "Don't worry." I watched her leave, then turned my attention to the next step. This was no longer just about me. This was about standing up to the family who had tried to tear me down, about protecting what I had built. As I returned to the counter, the clock ticking softly in the background, I knew what I had to do. It was time to stop playing defense. The morning after everything had exploded, I sat at my desk, a cold cup of coffee in hand, staring at the blinking cursor on my screen. The bakery was quiet for now, a strange calm that didn't seem to match the storm brewing online. I had tried to focus on my work, but all I could think about was the letter on the doormat, the words etched into it, asking me to speak before it was too late. It was like everything was building to something bigger, and I had no idea what was coming next. But I wasn't going to sit around and wait anymore. That's when I checked my phone. It buzzed repeatedly, more than usual. My inbox was flooded with messages, and at the top of the list was a notification that made my heart race. Natalie had posted the truth, the group chat, the plans, everything, exposed for the world to see. Natalie's post went viral. She didn't hold back. She had shared screenshots, voice memos, everything she had on Project Reset. No names tagged, just the truth. She ended her post with a statement that made me feel seen, but also understood. "I won't marry into this. I can't be a part of it anymore." The next thing I knew, my phone was constantly vibrating. I opened Instagram first. #Stand with Faith was trending. My name was everywhere. I quickly flicked through hundreds of comments, and my heart pounded faster. She's not the black sheep. She's the phoenix. Families like this build warriors. She deserves better. This bakery is built on real love, not manipulation. I read each one carefully, replaying them over and over in my mind. The words were like balm on an open wound, but I wasn't about to let it show. It was happening. The world was seeing me. They were seeing the truth. The phone rang, and the bakery's phone line was buzzing with calls. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew things were changing. It wasn't just online chatter anymore. It was real. By the time noon came, I was booked out for 6 weeks. The reservations were flooding in, customers calling to make sure they could get a seat. I couldn't help but smile at the irony. This was the kind of attention I had been working for. Not the kind where people doubted me or tried to tear me down, but the kind where they supported me, where they recognized the value in what I'd built. A man walked in with a bouquet of flowers in his hands. His broad smile and warm eyes immediately put me at ease. "I just wanted to say thank you for standing up for yourself," he said, handing me the flowers. "I've been coming to your bakery for months. You've built something beautiful here. It's not just the food, it's the heart." And then, in a moment of unbelievable generosity, he handed me a check. "For surviving this with dignity, you've got a lot of people rooting for you," he said. I looked at the check. It was for $1,000. I couldn't speak. It felt like the universe was finally sending the kind of support I needed. I had done everything I could to keep things together, and now the world was starting to notice. But it wasn't just the customers. Later that afternoon, I got another surprise, one that nearly knocked me off my feet. My landlord called. "You're the pride of this street," he said. "You've been nothing but an asset to this community. I'm extending your lease for 5 more years and your rent's locked in." I couldn't believe it. The same man who had once questioned whether I'd make it was now vouching for me. "I don't know what's coming next, but you'll be here. We're with you," he said, his voice steady. It was the first time since I opened the bakery that I truly felt like I belonged here, not just as a business owner, but as a part of something bigger, something that wasn't just about food, but about what I stood for. I hadn't expected any of this to happen. I wasn't doing this for the accolades or the praise, but it was nice to feel the shift, to feel the power of standing up for myself and seeing the world rally behind it. Then, there it was, an incoming text from Ezra, my brother. "I didn't know Mom saved that stuff. I'm sorry." I stared at the message for a moment, feeling the familiar pang of betrayal. He thought a simple text could undo everything? That I would just accept his apology after everything he and the family had done? I didn't even reply. I just went back to folding napkins, tasting the sauce I'd been working on for the new menu. I was no longer concerned with their drama. The bakery was my focus now. But then, another surprise came, just when I thought I'd seen it all. A reporter from the Food Chronicle walked in, holding a camera bag. She walked up to the counter, her presence calm but confident. "I'm Ava Sinclair," she said, her voice easy. "We're doing a story on chefs who've had to fight to survive, 10 chefs who survived the fire, and you're our cover." I almost dropped the coffee I was holding. My heart raced as I looked at her. A feature? In the Food Chronicle. I'm honored," I said, my voice steady, though inside I was still processing everything. "But I don't do this for recognition. I do this for the people who believe in me." Ava smiled, nodding. "That's why we're doing this story, because you're one of the good ones." As she set up her camera, I couldn't help but think how much had changed in the past few days. I'd gone from being someone they tried to erase to someone whose story was about to be shared with the world, and it felt right. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. The invitation arrived exactly 1 year later. It was a gold foil envelope, thick with anticipation, resting on my doormat like an unspoken promise. The handwriting, elegant but familiar, said it all without a single word. Orion and Natalie were hosting a public brunch for their engagement. I could almost feel the weight of the photo op they had planned, their eyes on me, waiting for a reaction. I smiled, a small, tight smile, and walked over to the blender. Without a second thought, I dropped the invitation in. It spun in the blades, pieces of it swirling around until it was nothing more than confetti, a symbol of all the things I no longer needed to prove. They wanted a performance. They wanted me to show up, to bow to the spotlight they thought they controlled. But I wasn't playing that game anymore. The next day, I sat at my desk, scrolling through the documents for the second bakery location I had just signed a contract for. Juliet's Table 2, it was called. A historic brick building, complete with a rooftop garden and double the kitchen space. I ran my fingers over the plans, each line symbolizing everything I had built and everything I was about to build. It wasn't about them. It was never about them. It was about what I had created, what I was continuing to create. I thought about the people I had hired. Culinary school grads who couldn't get their foot in the door, single moms who had been overlooked by the industry, the unseen ones who deserved a chance. I wasn't just baking. We were rebuilding lives, rebuilding community. I hadn't forgotten those early days when the doors were shut on me by people who couldn't see what I was capable of. But I had found a way to make space for everyone else who had been told they weren't good enough. My team wasn't just skilled, they were resilient. That afternoon, as I sat at my desk in the new bakery's office, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Ava Sinclair, the journalist from the Food Chronicle. "Faith," it started. "We're doing a follow-up piece. What would you say to your family now?" I read the message twice before replying. There was no hesitation in my words when I typed, "Nothing. I didn't owe them anything. Not one more word. I had already said everything that needed to be said. But the world had heard me. They were still listening. It wasn't long before the media started buzzing with new coverage. The piece Ava had written was everywhere, spreading across social media like wildfire. I didn't need to say a word anymore. The truth had already done its job. The comments came pouring in, one after another. "Boundaries taste better than betrayal." "She's not the black sheep. She's the phoenix." "This woman's a legend." The bakery's Yelp rating, which had been tarnished by the smear campaign, had skyrocketed back up. I saw customers coming in, leaving tips that were more generous than ever. The support wasn't just financial, it was emotional, it was real. But as I went through the day, focusing on the operations of the bakery, I couldn't help but notice the silence from Orion and his side of the family. They didn't text, didn't reach out. There was no apology, no admission of wrong. But I had stopped waiting for it. Later that afternoon, as the evening rush died down, I received a text from Ezra. It was brief, a simple admission. "I didn't know Mom saved that stuff." "I'm sorry." I stared at the screen for a moment, my mind racing. I could have replied. I could have opened the door to more dialogue, more answers, but I didn't. I had already moved past the need for explanations. There was nothing left for me in those words, so I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on what mattered: folding napkins, tasting new recipes, perfecting the art of running my own business. The bakery was mine now, and the only voices I needed to listen to were those of the customers who truly cared. Then, as the evening turned into night, something unexpected happened. A reporter from the Food Chronicle walked in, her camera in hand. "Faith, we'd like to feature you in our upcoming issue," she said. "You're our cover story for 10 chefs who survived the fire." I blinked, surprised at how much had changed since the last time they'd written about me. "I'm honored," I said, my voice calm, steady. "But I'm not here for recognition. I'm here to build something that lasts." The reporter smiled, impressed with my composure. "That's exactly why we want to tell your story, because you're building something worth talking about." As she set up her camera, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of peace. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my story, my narrative, my voice. That night, after the last customer had left, I sat at the counter of the bakery, looking out at the darkened street. It was quiet now, calm, but I knew it wouldn't stay that way forever. People were watching, and they were finally starting to see me. They weren't just seeing the bakery, they were seeing me as a person, and I wasn't going anywhere. The fire they lit in an attempt to burn me had only made me stronger. I wasn't the one who had been burned. I was the one who had emerged from the ashes. As we wrap up this story, one thing is clear. Sometimes the strongest revenge isn't about getting even, but about standing your ground and rising above the pain. Faith's journey shows us that success isn't about the people who doubted you, but about proving to yourself that you can do it. No matter how much life throws at us, we have the power to build our own path and reclaim our story. What do you think about Faith's decision to focus on her own growth instead of revenge? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notifications so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories that explore family, betrayal, and finding the strength within.